This is a recording of the first talk we would have done, Anne and I, for the Spatial Practices unit, and it's a focus on the idea of narrative space. What you can see here with this opening image is a kind of typographical, sculptural space that's been developed, and you can see how potentially it can be walked through and read. It's an interesting exercise in readability. This is a quote from Lucas Ferrace about staging space. So this relates very much to design, but uses film as a context to think about design in space. Let's just read through it. A filmmaker can affect and manipulate the viewer's attention by using contrasts, movement, narrative emphasis, and visual patterns. A similar range of techniques is available to the designer of space. So this is interesting because he's making a kind of connection between, and this is one of the things that I talk about a lot, is not necessarily looking at the visual style of something, but trying to work out someone's approach, how someone's making interesting connections across different disciplines. So, for someone designing space, looking at a filmmaker, I think film is a very interesting way to think about design, and this idea of contrast, movement, and narrative emphasis is something that you can apply to visual patterns. You can apply to lots and lots of work. So, deriving from the world of theatre and film, the French term mise en scène, literally meaning putting on the stage, probably best describes the creative approach towards fully exhausting the dramatic power of space. So, mise en scène is literally this idea of what you see in a frame, if you like. So in a sense it's composition, but with the idea of spatial practice or a spatial design, if you like, is that a viewer kind of enters into that space. Now with spatial design, as opposed to theatre and film, you're not kept at a distance. You are invited to, a lot of the time you are invited to enjoy that space by going into it or being surrounded by it. You can also have a kind of a distanced space, if you like, i.e. a kind of window. Could be a commercial setting where you kind of create a spatial design event within a kind of commercial window space, or just in a kind of any window space. What's good about using a window space is you don't have to, as a kind of making a spatial practice, spatial design intervention, is you don't have to invigilate it. It's like a kind of permanently sited exhibition that's on display to the public, and I think that's very interesting, this idea of being on display to the public, where you don't have to kind of look after it, if you like. Very good way to engage the public. It designates the calculated scenic arrangement in which image, text, and space merge to form a narrative and sense-generating whole. So, a calculated scenic arrangement. Now, a calculated scenic arrangement, the way I would kind of think about that is what you put in a space and how you decide to kind of think about what stays and what goes. So in other words, experimenting in space. So in some ways, our 2-day workshop is about experimenting in space, creating artifacts out of cardboard, out of paper, maybe making video projections, collaging things together, assembling things to make a calculated scenic arrangement. Now the things that we assemble could be images, they could be texts, they could be objects, but they kind of link together. In an assemblage, what you're trying to do is just trying to create links between the different elements. And I think it's very important, very interesting to experiment with that, to have that practical experimentation. This is why we want to have the 2-day workshop at the start of this unit. So you have the chance to kind of practically experiment with how and what works in a particular space. Once you have that kind of practical experience, then the decisions and the judgments you make are so much more informed after that workshop. If we don't have that workshop, there's going to be a bit of a pain in terms of how we kind of talk to you in terms of creating this sort of do you call it, a sense generating whole, creating a narrative within a kind of space. And that narrative, again, as we kind of discussed in the other unit, can be very kind of loose, very broad, or very precise, but it kind of really depends on where you want to go within your own practice.